Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the February 9th meeting for Environmental Matters Committee. And for the record, all the members are present. Do I have any kind of motion to approve the agenda?
Madam Chair, move to approve, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, move to approve the agenda as written. I am sorry.
The bearded madam, I guess.
Are we on avant-garde? Second?
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All right. And do I have any motion regarding approving the minutes from the last meeting?
May I do it correctly this time, Mr. Chair? Move approval of the minutes from the January 12th meeting.
Second?
All those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. And now we have election of the chair. You have to.
I nominate.
Have any nominations?
I nominate the current chair, Alderman Savage.
I'll second that.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. And now we have, let's see, general discussion. I'd like to invite forward Watershed Stewards Academy to give a presentation to us. And thank you for coming to the meeting today. And if you could both state your names for the record, please.
Jeffrey Pop. Jeffrey Pop, Director of Restoration, Watershed Stewards. Jeffrey Pop, Director of Restoration, Watershed Stewards Academy.
Brian Adams, City Urban Forester.
Okay, so thank you all for inviting Watershed Stewards Academy to be part of the meeting today. Today we're going to be talking about our Replant Annapolis program and kind of giving you a little bit of information about year one and where we're thinking of heading with year two. So first off, what is the Watershed Stewards Academy? So we are a nonprofit organization engaged with stewards, so community members, to engage them in providing stewardship to the land. So we envision a community in Anne Arundel County actively engaged to ensure a healthy environment for all. And we do that through multiple programs, mainly our certification program, but we also have some planting programs and community engagement programs as well. So since 2009, when Watershed Stewards was born, Watershed Stewards, so again, community members in Anne Arundel County, have installed over 4,000 projects, have planted over 200,000 native plants and trees, and engaged over 200,000 residents through our programs. Here's just a list of some of our programs. So we have our signature Watershed Steward certification course, where we've trained over 300 watershed stewards throughout the county. We have our Replant Anne Arundel program, which is a contract, a MOU between the county and watershed stewards. It's a $200,000 contract. And just last year, we planted over 4,000 trees. We have Repollinate Anne Arundel, where last year we distributed over 2,600 native plants to the community. We have two programs geared to helping communities and HOAs understand how to manage stormwater in their communities and maintain stormwater best management practices. We have Clean Water Communities and Stormwater Success. And we're here today to talk about Replant Annapolis. So Replant Annapolis was born basically out of a need for increasing the tree canopy in the city of Annapolis. Since 2011, the city of Annapolis has lost over 100 acres of tree canopy cover. Based on our Replant Anne Arundel program, working with the county, we developed a similar model with Replant Annapolis, which was a city-funded tree planting program focused on helping the city meet their urban tree canopy goals by 2036. Just a quick refresher on the benefits of trees. So I think a lot of us know many of these, but so trees really are important. Trees improve our air quality. they increase property value, they can provide energy and conservation savings to residents, they provide shade, they provide bird and pollinator habitat, and they reduce stormwater runoff, which leads to improved water quality for our creeks and eventually the Chesapeake Bay. So for year one of the City of Annapolis replant program, and mind you, we're still in year one. So this program began last spring, so we're not even through 1 year. We developed this partnership with the city. In March 2022, we signed an MOU. In March 2022, we engaged the City of Annapolis residents they were invited to a tree trooper training. And then in April 2022, we formalized the partnership with City of Annapolis through an MOU with a total funding amount of $30,000. The goal was simple. It was to increase the tree canopy in the City of Annapolis. Through the program, we provide 3 options to get these trees in the ground. We provide the option for volunteer plantings, so if communities want to take part in actually engaging their community and planting trees on their own. For those who may not be able to do that, we provide the option for contractor plantings. And then we also provide the option for a hybrid planting, where a contractor digs the holes and the community finishes the job. So they go in and actually plant the tree and make sure that it's in the right spot. And we do this through multiple approach. So we identify and train community leaders through our tree trooper program to lead these tree projects. We're a staff of 8, and so we don't have the capacity to go through and make sure that everybody has trees in their community, in each community. And so we engage these tree troopers. We engage new audiences and communities, and we provide technical resources and support for the community leaders, including the following: tree biology and identification, identifying locations for trees in the landscape, how to properly plant a tree, volunteer outreach and engagement strategies, maintenance and monitoring protocols, and project reporting. We keep tabs on every tree that's planted through this program. So looking at the numbers, again, we're still in the middle of year 1 of this program, wrapping up with some spring projects this year. But we engaged 24 Annapolis residents that came to our March 2022 Tree Trooper training course, which is 5 sessions total. And I just want to point out too that training happened before this MOU was signed. So these are residents that just expressed interest on their own. I think moving forward, we can definitely increase that number. 7 expressed interest in carrying out a tree planting project. So they took the course, they were trained, and they found places to plant trees within their community. Replant Annapolis completed 4 planting projects just this fall. So here they are broken down by numbers. So the Salt Air community had 38 trees. The Wardour community had 47 trees. Both of those projects were done by just a pair of tree troopers. Chesapeake Children's Museum was 17 through 1 tree ambassador, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then we have our Groves of Gratitude program, where we provide, it's basically a tree giveaway program where people can come pick up trees at a reduced cost. And 2 of those were from the City of Annapolis. So in total, we planted 104 trees by fall of 2022, with more to come. And just to break it down for you a little bit more, just so you understand, so the average cost per tree there, as you can see, for a volunteer planted tree, we're looking at the cost of the recruitment, the engagement, the support, the cost of the tree and materials, and including the installation, is $140 for volunteer planted projects, as well as $270 for contractor plantings. The number of residents engaged in this first year so far has been 96. So again, breaking it down by community there. And then the other engagement efforts, so again, through our tree giveaway programs, our steward course, and other ways of engagement, an additional 33 community members have been engaged. We have some projects in the pipeline for this spring already, but we're looking to add more. So we have a potential partnership with Severn River Association at the Pitt Moyer Center for 10 trees, planting trees with students. There's a potential 24 tree project in the Bluffs community. And then additional tree troopers are currently working on planning their tree projects for spring and fall of 2023. As I said, we have a bead on kind of every tree that goes in. And so we have this breakdown here, and we don't have to spend too much time on it. I just wanted to kind of point out that we do have the breakdown by species. And so again, breaking down those 104 trees, we have the majority were flowering dogwood, which is a very popular flowering small tree, holly, witch hazel, and sweet bay magnolia, all small trees. Whereas we had our canopy species, our large shade towering species, were not as popular in the city. So again, just looking at canopy versus understory, again, a canopy tree are your oaks, your hickories, your larger, taller trees. That was about 25% of our total trees this year so far, whereas most people were requesting the smaller understory trees, so your dogwoods, your smaller magnolias. And we think the reason for that is simple, is that most people they would prefer 2 small trees versus 1 large tree. Also, the amount of planting space available. So in smaller yards, you're probably not going to have a ton of room for your larger canopy trees. I mentioned the Tree Ambassador Program. So the Tree Ambassador Program is a new program with WSA. It's our first year running that as well. This is a program that was funded by the Chesapeake Bay Trust Urban Trees Grant Program. And so we are awarded funds to focus on urban areas of low income, high unemployment, historically underserved communities to get trees in the ground. This is a stipend-based program, so when we're recruiting, we let those folks know that they will be paid a stipend to take the training. They get a stipend to recruit tree hosts when they complete a planting project, and then again for project maintenance. And this was to reduce the barriers to help plant trees. So some lessons learned for year 1. So overall, the reception was very well. So those who were engaged participated in a tree planting project. They wanted trees in their community, and there's definitely room to do more. There's an interest in a tree giveaway program because not for a project in the Tree Trooper program, generally we're looking at a 10-tree project. And so we're trying to work out ways where we can figure out how to get individual trees into these communities on a case-by-case basis. And so maybe a tree giveaway program similar to our backyard buffers, Groves of Gratitude program is a way to go. Looking ahead to Replant Annapolis Year 2. So we're beginning to already start to recruit for our next Tree Trooper training, which happens at the end of March. We want to collaborate with our Tree Ambassador program and really focus on high priority areas in the Urban Tree Grant program. We want to increase the total amount of Replant Annapolis projects completed by fall of 2023, assuming it is funded again. We want to increase the canopy species. We know that these canopy species are important from an infrastructure perspective, as well as a habitat and water quality perspective. And then we have a new restoration coordinator because our original restoration coordinator, who's in the back, Rob, he's great, and he's led this program through where we are now, but we're hiring a new restoration coordinator this spring. So looking ahead, again, how can Watershed Stewards Academy continue to work with the City of Annapolis to identify and engage community leaders interested in trees? How can the city help us promote this Tree Trooper program and Tree Ambassador program? And then we really want to try and figure out ways to incentivize the canopy trees, to figure out ways, whether it's in community properties or other spaces where we can really focus on getting these larger, longer-lived trees within the city limits. With that, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee?
I do.
You do?
Yep.
Okay, Alderwoman?
Thank you. Very informative. A few questions. How do you follow up? I'm recalling that a tree was planted in the park in my community, and it has died because I'm sure it wasn't being watered. I mean, it was in a park, so, you know. So how do you, what's the resiliency, I guess, of the trees that we're planting? Do they need that kind of attention where somebody's got to go out and water it once a week, or Heaven forbid they're like at my house when it's like once a month. So I mean, you know, but that's my question. How do we maintain the trees that are being planted?
Sure, it's a great question. And so I'll start by saying we focus on planting most of our trees in the fall because they tend to have the highest survivability. We also plant a little bit in spring just because it is the rainy season, but those trees planted in fall really have a really good chance to set root and be a little bit more resilient versus trees planted in the warmer months. With regards to follow-up, we have tree troopers. By training those tree troopers, it's not kind of a one and done thing. Those tree troopers are out there with the folks that they're engaging with, reminding them to water, reminding them to come back and mulch, and then investing into that project maintenance side of things. It's something that we, on our end, are reminding our tree troopers to do, who then kind of remind the folks that they're working with to go out and do. And so it's something, we have a monitoring program where we're monitoring every 3 years. This program hasn't been around that long, so we haven't gone through and monitored, but they are on our radar. So they get put into our monitoring list, and we do replace them as needed. If they die the first year, we can replace them. But yeah, we do have a program in place to make sure they're being maintained properly.
So the tree troopers have a group of volunteers for whom they're responsible, and they follow up with them to make sure that the volunteers are following up with their trees.
Yeah, exactly. So the tree trooper is kind of the community leader leading the tree planting effort with our support. And then they go out, and once they find, if say we were to plant a tree at your house, they kind of help you make sure you have the right tree in the right place, which is critical. And then you're planting it properly. And then they follow up with you on a regular basis to make sure that tree is doing okay. And then if something happens to that tree, they can also come back to the tree trooper and say, our tree didn't make it. What's the next step? And that's where we can step in as an organization.
Great. HOAs. I know some of our community HOAs have a landscaping subcommittee or a gardening subcommittee. Are they invited to participate, or they seem like a good source for volunteers in my mind? So are they
Absolutely.
accessed?
Yeah, we would love access to HOAs. The toughest part of a tree planting program is finding places to plant trees. And so if there are folks out there that know they want trees, they can definitely be in touch with us. And we would be happy to get them all set up.
Okay. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'll just say, following up on that, as Jeff mentioned, this being the first year, they got sort of a late start. And so this year in the spring, we'd really like to promote this a lot more than we got to last year. So city social media. So hopefully it gets out to some of the community groups and let them know this program is available.
Great. Thank you.
Alderman Arnett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I hope you can send the PowerPoints to us. We didn't memorize the whole presentation, but it'd be nice to be able to review it. I am particularly concerned about the loss of tree canopy in all of our backyards. And in fact, it reminds me I need to talk to our Office of Law about amending our tree rules to make removal of trees in the backyard follow the same rules as removal of trees in the front yard. We've had a huge loss of canopy in Ward 8. For some reason, and this will be my next question, people want to clear cut their backyard. They don't like all that canopy there. So we've lost several specimen trees totally legally, but I think unnecessarily. So I was interested, I don't know if you can go back to the slide about the mix of trees. There are actually trees there. I'm partial to serviceberry because it's something for the birds and pollinators, so I put one in my backyard when I had to replace. I was not partial to the holly tree, so I was glad to see its demise, although it was gigantic. But dogwoods, I have 3 or 4 in my yard, so I understand that. But some of these other trees, like loblolly pine, I sort of think of North Carolina and big tree farms and pulp mills and so forth. Persimmon is an interesting sounding trees, but which of these, I'm showing you my ignorance, I get it, oaks are probably a canopy tree, but which ones of these, I don't know black gum either, which ones of these are canopy trees?
Yeah, great question. So looking at this list, really your oaks, your loblolly, your black gum, river birch get pretty tall. That's pretty much it looking at this list. Persimmon gets pretty tall too. Oh, is red maple on there? I didn't see it. Oh yeah, and red maple. So those are your primary canopy trees. And I think again too that most people know maple. So I feel like, the maples turn bright red in the fall. Right. And so I feel like that's one of the reasons that's a little bit more represented there. But I think, again, a lot of these other trees, people don't really know, so they don't know to request them.
Right.
But yeah.
So a tree planting opportunity, it seems to me, and a huge opportunity is on all of our public housing property. They're desolate. They're actually depressing. And I think that's something where you may find sentiment on the council to join you in possibly finding some funding. But I think that would make such a huge difference on our public housing properties. And the last question is, and this is, you may not be able to answer it, I'm trying to figure out why people wanted to get rid of all of their canopy trees in the backyards. Are there, in the pluses you listed in your opening statement, are there minuses that make them want to make them all go away?
I will tell you that I've seen there was a fatality about a year ago, not in the city. It was a little further east. And following incidents like that, I see a push from people really wanting to just eliminate large trees because they think if it's large, it can take my house out. I get, in dealing with the city, I get a lot of those complaints, inquiries, requests, that sort of thing. So,
I know trees don't live forever except for sequoias and Scotch pines and things like that. So, could it be in Ward 8, which is an older neighborhood, that some of these trees have lived their full life and it's actually time for them to come down and be replaced?
That's definitely a possibility. We're seeing that in Ward 2 with the tulip poplar trees that were planted, back 100 years ago, and they're all sort of maxing out in age. But the other thing I will say that we've seen is the last few years is oak decline. We're losing a number of oak trees for multiple reasons. There's no one specific cause. It's a mix of factors, but that's likely as well.
So when we do the backyard legislation, which I hope you'll join me on, should we have some provision that if a tree has ended its useful life, where we face that differently than if it's just at the convenience of the homeowner? They want to put a 4-car garage back there. We'll come to you, Brian.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll get your help when you draft it. But well, thank you again. You can tell we're interested because we're actually asking you questions.
Yes.
All right, so I have a few questions myself. Are there any protections placed on these plantings as far as easements?
Yeah, so they do sign a property owner agreement that basically says they're going to protect the tree. It's very hard to enforce, I think. But for the most part, they sign an agreement saying that they're going to take care of this tree, they're going to maintain it. But there's no formal easement or anything like that put on the tree.
Is there anything you think that could be done to have it carry over with the property as far as getting it somehow attached to the deed?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm sure we could figure something out. I know with the county, my previous employer was the Chesapeake Bay Trust, and we worked with the county to come up with a long-term protection agreement that did go with the property, and so there may be some language that could be used in that regard.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because I'd be happy to, if we need to change any of our code to maybe require that either realtors, if we can, realtors inform new owners of any kind of restrictions on the property or easements, that'd be something we could look into.
Definitely. Thank you.
And as I think my colleague said, please do share with us information you have on future events, trainings or plantings, because we can really help get the word out to our constituents.
Great, thank you.
And you mentioned in one of the slides your certain priority areas for year 2. What are they and how have they been determined?
So the priority areas that I mentioned were based on the Urban Trees Grant, and those are typically the underserved, underrepresented communities.
Based on what? I'm sorry.
That's based on the EJ screen that the EPA put together.
Environmental justice.
Yeah,
screen.
environmental justice, exactly. So it's based on those kind of overlays, and that's very specific to the Urban Tree Program. Within the overall Replant Annapolis program, we can work both within and outside of that area.
Can you put together a map showing those areas? Because this is going to come up during the next budget, and which was kind of my next question. So it'd be good to have all this data you just mentioned as far as the number of trees planted, communities, but also I think attach a map of where you're thinking, because I think we would like to see that for sure. And as far as the money, where I guess this might be for Mr. Adams, where did that money come from out of the budget? Which tree account?
This came actually from the Public Works watershed restoration fee.
Okay.
So,
Makes sense. Yeah.
yep. And I think, obviously, I think it's a great use of the money. And I think that part of us presenting to you is because we do want to get support to do year 2. We started with 30,000 this year. We're not done yet, but that did a number of projects. I think we could do more than that. But so we'll be looking to hopefully use those funds again.
Yeah, so if you could maybe compile this and send it to Mr. Adams and Ms. Guile or Ms. Hodo, it'd be good to get this also included since the money's coming out of the watershed fund. We're supposed to get an annual report about how that money is spent, and I think this would be good to put in there if we can get that this year. All right.
May I ask a
yes.
follow-up question? Is that fund also used to pay for trees that need to be removed on private property? And you probably remember what I'm getting at.
No, it's not.
Okay.
I guess the use of that fund is, it's aimed at what benefits are those trees providing, right, for stormwater management and that sort of thing. So the private property tree maintenance is a separate issue for sure.
Okay. Thank you.
And I do have some pending legislation Mr. Adams is helping me with to basically require permits before removing trees over, I think we said 18 inches in the critical area. The first attempt on the backyard tree protection failed, but hopefully this will pass. But that's to come in the future. All right, I think that's it. Any other questions on this?
Okay, thank you.
All right, we'll look forward to hearing more about it in the budget. And yeah, thanks again for coming out.
Thank you.
And is that your supervisor sitting in the back there, Miss Suzanne?
Hi. How you doing? Nice.
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I was telling Jeff the story before about the first time I presented to you at TAC and how scared I was. She was my high school English. I hope my colleagues.
You did good. Thank you. They did a great job.
I don't think so. Was there anybody from the public who wanted to comment on this topic? Okay. Or the commission? All right. Move on to the next ID for general discussion, which is the pollinator garden update from Ms. Hodo.
Good afternoon. Racine Hodo, Environmental Programs Coordinator. I work very closely with Jackie Guile on resilience and sustainability issues for the city. Today, I'm going to give a really quick update, if I can, there we are, on where we stand with potentially installing pollinator gardens around the solar arrays at the Annapolis Solar Park. What I have here, I grabbed a picture. Purdue Farms over on the Eastern Shore has a very small solar array, and what they've done is they've put a pollinator garden around that solar array. It's a very small plot. But I juxtaposed that next to the city's, this is the best picture I could get my computer to work with me on, of the Annapolis Solar Park. And so what we would be looking at is potentially installing pollinator gardens in the green areas around the solar arrays. Now, there's some green area that is outside. There's a fence line around the solar park. And outside of the fence line is also mowed and maintained, although there are no solar panels out there. But that is an area that could be planted as well. So one of the benefits here is that land right now around the solar arrays is just sitting there and not being used. It's being mowed probably 3 or 4 times a year. The company Novus Renewables, who is running the solar park, mows the grass there. If we were to install pollinator gardens in the green areas that exist now, we would be installing additional pollinator habitat, where if you go online or if you talk to people, you hear about bees losing their habitat and other pollinators losing their habitat. So this would be providing it. It also would, as a bird city, Annapolis would also be providing bird habitat. You're going to, have all kinds of little bugs and things that birds would like to go after and eat as well. There are some birds that are pollinators too. Some of the benefits there. So what I have found out so far are there are 2 approaches. There's a chemical approach and a non-chemical approach. You might want to think of it as maybe, I guess, an organic approach. The chemical approach would be using an herbicide to prepare the land for planting, which means you would burn off the grass that is already there in order to prepare it for planting. This is done, and after you have to wait a year after you do that, and then after a year you go in and you plant your pollinator garden. It takes pollinator gardens on average about 3 years to establish themselves. And through that 3-year period of time, there are times at least once a year where you mow, and maybe more consistently or more often you would at least walk through and maybe reseed in areas where plants are not growing well. So the maintenance of from the chemical approaches, after you wait a year, you put the seed in, and then once a year you mow. A couple times a year you spot check, and you would use the herbicide for any problem areas, for areas where there would be invasives or I'm not really sure, invasives or maybe trees that are coming in. But I have to let you know that I did have a walkthrough with a landscaper, and he told me the only invasive that he really saw right away from when we were there is Bermuda grass. And he said Bermuda grass is very hard to get rid of, so you just have to kind of learn to live with it. But as far as I can tell, or from what he can tell, the only invasive that we would be worried about would be Bermuda grass. The other approach would be you sort of leave the grass where it is and you mow the grass down, you aerate the land, and then you throw seed out on it. And then you let that grow. And you do this once a year for 3 years where you mow, aerate, and seed. There are no chemicals that are used. What'll happen is that Initially, you're going to have a smaller, maybe 25% pollinator garden to grass. So 25% pollinator, 75% grass. But over time, the pollinator garden will spread itself. And when you mow, aerate, and seed, you're also throwing out more seed. So over time, the pollinator garden to grass increases. So after 3 years, it would be more, I don't know exactly what the percentage would be, but it would be more than 50% of pollinator to grass that would be left there. Even if you take a chemical approach, regardless of which approach you take, once you plant the pollinator garden, you're still going to get grass. You're going to still see grass. But this non-chemical approach, you sort of phase in the pollinator garden. The maintenance would be spot checking. It's more labor intensive where you have more, with the non-chemical approach, where you have to have labor walking the grounds and then physically removing any kind of invasives or any problem plants or trees that have volunteered themselves. So those are the two approaches. So the cost, the chemical approach, now these numbers I have to say are not written in stone. These are estimates that I've gotten through my conversations with different people. So as you can see, the chemical approach is less expensive than the organic approach or the non-chemical approach. We have also, Jackie and I have talked to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They are in support of the chemical approach and instead of the non-chemical approach. They have some funding, not a lot. They cannot promise any funding, but if they get the funding that they usually get, they would be willing to potentially give us some funding for the chemical approach. We would look for grant funding. We have not looked for that yet. I'm not sure where to start with looking for the grant funding. We're trying to get it listed in the CIP as a CIP project. And I'm working with Marsha Patrick now on getting that done the proper way. And Novus Renewables, we're back to the company that is running the solar park. Novus Renewables, I spoke to a representative there. She said she took a look at the contract between the city of Annapolis and Novus Renewables. And per the contract, if we did a project like this, that Novus Renewables would more than likely pay the cost of it. But that's if they agree. They have not committed to letting us do this. They have not told us whether or not they would prefer a chemical approach or a non-chemical approach. So that's some of where the funding for the project, if we do the chemical approach, comes from. The non-chemical approach, I think, is more labor intensive. And again, not written in stone, but this is an estimate, $350,000 to $400,000 over a 3-year period of time. So we would also look for grant funding. Again, we're still trying to get it listed in the CIP regardless of which approach we take, chemical or non-chemical. And then Novus Renewables, I think, would be there for at least some of the cost, if not all of the cost, of putting in a pollinator garden at the solar park. The challenges we have are that it's cheaper to use chemicals, more expensive to take a more holistic approach. The use of chemicals, what the byproduct or what the effects of using chemicals, we do not know. The scientist over at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, he explained, even if you don't use chemicals, you can mow instead. But when you mow, it's much more aggressive, and, like little turtles and other little critters get chewed up in the mowers when you use the mowers. So, neither approach is absolutely a perfect approach in how to put in the pollinator gardens. But, and what affects the chemicals versus the mowing, the effects on the habitat area for the little critters around. So these are challenges that we're still, trying to work out and trying to get answers to. But that's where we stand right now. We've got two approaches. One's very expensive, one's not so expensive. One is chemical and one is chemical free. I'd be happy to answer any questions to the best of my ability.
Questions? I'm going to start with Alderman Arnett this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I challenge that the space is unused. In visiting there is when I learned that our deputy city manager is an expert in scat. and it turns out there are a lot of critters up there, including a lot of foxes and
geese
birds,
and
geese,
ducks.
yeah, so forth. So
Yeah.
it is being used. I have a hard time, first of all, understanding why the chemical approach would be cheaper than the more natural approach. But I just can't believe that we'll be putting chemicals on top of a hill flowing down to the reservoir where we have a lot of wildlife and where we have some people fishing. And I know it's catch and release, but eventually we may want to take things out of there. I think the mayor mentioned a third approach, which I find quite fascinating and not surprising given that he's an Aussie, which is instead of mowing, introduce sheep up there. And
I did look into sheep.
yes,
And we would, there are either goats or sheep. Goats jump, so we really don't want goats up
They
there
also
jumping
eat.
on the solar arrays.
Yeah.
The sheep don't jump. I got and again, it's an estimate, it's not written in stone, but I got a cost of about $50,000 to use sheep once a year up there. And it sort of, I think they sort of be in one area and then in another area and then in another area. But Novus Renewables right now, what they pay for mowing is $40,000. So the sheep would be more expensive than just mowing.
I know, but then we can use it for the new restaurant at Waterworks Park. So not only will we have the agriculture, but we can have free-range sheep. What a menu we'd have. So, no, I think this is very exciting, and I really would encourage, as a son of a biologist, that we try to be as natural as possible, even if it is more expensive. I
think it's more labor intensive, which is why it's more expensive.
But I think we can, I bet you any amount of money, we can farm this out to some of our local environmentalists and get a lot of different inputs about things we can do creatively, and maybe even raise funding to help support it. But I mean, this is such a winner, particularly with the decline in a lot of the pollinators. Anything we can do to bring them back. And I would think the city manager would want to put some hives there, given he has hives in his yard.
Well, I did ask him about that because he does have his own hives.
Right.
And so when we were up there with the mayor mentioned the possibility of putting boxes, hives, in a corner of the park and whatnot. And I asked the city manager, would that be a problem with people as far as bees, approaching people and or attacking people and so on and so forth. He said no, that the bees they're pretty kind of to themselves, and you really wouldn't have a problem with it. He thinks it would be a great idea to put bee boxes up there.
We can turn it into quite an ecological park.
So you want sheep, honey, and do you want hops up there for the brewery?
And the sheep.
And we could be cultivating another substance that will soon be legal.
All right.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Finlayson.
Yeah, that latter was what I was thinking you were going to. I still don't understand. I think, Ms. Hodo, you said the non-chemical is more labor intensive. Because it's like 3 or 4 times. the
Right,
cost.
so if you're there and you see, let's say you mow in November of one year and then you come back in November of the next year, and you see that there are some trees that have volunteered in the pollinator. You don't want trees. Trees are going to interfere with the solar panels as well as getting in the way of the pollinator plants getting sunshine and whatnot. The non-chemical way is you would have to physically remove that tree, where the chemical is you just kind of spray it, and let it die on its own.
So it is just labor.
I think it's more labor intensive.
Okay. There are probably other beekeepers in the city, in addition to our city manager, who could probably be enticed to use a little section there also. So, thank you.
Yeah. And what is the plan for the CIP? Are you going to have a phase where we take a deeper dive as far as, there are a lot of different ideas?
Yeah, honestly, I don't know how to answer a CIP question. That's a question that you would need to speak to Jackie about.
Okay.
I'm just trying to formulate it, get it written, so that it's written properly and put together properly for the CIP.
Yeah, it might be worthwhile. And I don't know if the Watershed Steward Academy might be interested or willing to look at some of the stormwater. We could always work that in at the same time, perhaps, to combine approaches. I don't know what the stormwater is like up there, but so I don't know if there are opportunities or not.
there's the area around the park.
How many acres do you know?
It's 80 acres. The park is 80 acres. And talking to someone at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, if you're going to plant around solar arrays, the estimate is you're going to plant 60% of the total acreage. And 60% of 80 is 48. So when I was looking for information to be able to give to Jackie so that we could have a real conversation about this, I was using 40 acres as my number.
Okay. So you said Novus currently pays for maintenance, and that's 40,000?
That's 40,000 to mow the grass that is existing up
So
there.
they mow, it's not our public works.
No,
folks,
they
okay.
mow.
And let's see. I guess that's it. I mean, we have a number of environmental groups in the hall today. Anybody want to chime in as far as preferred approach or comments, thoughts on? Oh, I'm sorry. I keep forgetting. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no. I just had a question for my own curiosity. And I know Racine's been there. So as I'm walking on the very narrow trail, right, I'm trying to visualize where this is, because inboard, towards the solar panels, there's a stretch of land, but then you have the slope down. So where is it relative to the perimeter trail, that the walking trail?
That's going to be planted?
Yeah. I was just trying to visualize where it was.
Well, we're sort of...
And the only reason I'm asking is that trail, you have mountain bikes and...
You see here, these are the solar panels, and there's a fence line here. Now, outside the fence line, all the way around the park could be planted.
Okay.
And inside the fence line, where you see these patches of green around the solar panels would be planted.
Okay.
Now, I think over time, we haven't decided, whether the approach is to plant in between the panels or to leave that unplanted. I think over time, the pollinator garden would migrate to the paneled area. Interference with the panels, we can choose the types of plants that are planted. So we can choose a short type of plant rather than a tall plant so that the plants would not interfere with the use of the solar panels at all. So there's some decisions to be made, but we're talking about sort of just the perimeter
Right around.
around.
Okay. So not outside of the walking trail where there's the slope and all.
No,
that
I think the
area.
walking trail is over here somewhere.
Yeah.
And we're talking, all over here.
I just didn't want Gavin with his bike to, mow over it,
Yeah, I think there's one part of the walking trail that can be seen when you're in the solar park, but I haven't been to all little corners of the solar park. I've seen most of it, but not the whole thing.
Thank you.
One other question before I open it up. Have you reached out to MDE? Because they may have a preference because they're wetlands of special state concern down at the
Well,
bottom.
a preference, I have not reached out to MDE at all about that. I haven't reached out to MDE at all. Initially, I was going to say something, but I was thinking DNR, not MDE. So no, I have not reached out to MDE.
Okay. Because they may have an opinion, I don't know, just because of the state of those wetlands at the bottom. But okay, and anybody from the audience want to comment on this? All right.
I have 2 comments.
Oh, yes. Please come up to the mic if you'd like.
Happy to talk more about.
Push, okay. So I think this is an exciting project for 2 reasons. The first, and Racine, you did such a great summary of something that's very complicated. So it was great. We work a lot with pollinators, and there's a lot of interest in bees and honeybees, but a lot of our native bees are what we really need to bring back, and a lot of those native bees are specific to certain species of plants, plant specialists, and we're growing a lot of those plants out at the USGS lab out near Patuxent Wildlife Research Center. And one thing that we know is that some of these pollinator plants are not appropriate for the residential landscape and that they don't look neat and tidy. And this would be a great place to introduce those in a way that it's not a landscape or a garden. So I think that's a tremendous possibility. And the other thing, which my colleagues in the back may know.
Can you identify yourself real quick?
Oh, Suzanne Etkin, Watershed Stewards Academy. And the other thing that my colleagues in the back may know more, or you guys may know more than I, which is that you might be able to also count turf to landscape conversion for your MS4 permit because it's such a large area. And I don't know what's in your MS4 permit. I don't know if it's worth it, but that's something that you might be able to get credit for.
I think that'd be a gift to the county, though, since it's.
Oh, right,
Yeah.
county land. Yeah. All right, well.
We'll have to bring that up with them, though.
Maybe they'll fund part of it.
Yeah.
Suzanne
Well,
made,
that's a good point, actually, because they'll get credits. They may. That's a really good point.
Suzanne reminded me when she was speaking, there was a third approach that Jackie and I have bounced around a little bit, and I've put out some feelers, is to potentially maybe do a study up at the solar park on the 2 different approaches so that the study can prove yay or nay which approach is the better approach or stronger approach. So I reached out to someone over at the University of Maryland, and he's going to put his name is Mike Hunninghake. Do you know Mike Hunninghake? I think.
What was the last name?
Hunninghake? No. Yeah. He helps us with our sustainable Maryland certification.
Oh, yeah.
And that's through the University of Maryland. So he's going to put out some feelers and get back to me with some names of people that I might be able to bounce some questions off of about the approach of doing a study up there on which is the best way to prepare for a pollinator garden.
Good. Excellent. And I think I'm glad that, Ekin, you brought that up with the county. I think we should, I think you should, would you be willing to send this to Eric Michelson with the county's Bureau of Watershed Protection and Restoration? Because again, they have a lot of money, and if they can get credit, they might be willing to chip in.
Oh,
So
Eric Michelson?
Yeah, so at some point.
I will pass this on to Jackie and
Yeah.
I'll give her that suggestion from you.
Okay. Especially as we get further along, it might be good to walk through the property. All right. Was there another question? Comment?
I was just going to come up and comment.
Well, you have your report next, so why don't you we'll just transition into that and you can comment. Thank you, Ms. Soto.
Sure.
Thank you.
So the next ID is an update from the Environmental Commission.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Allison Colden, Vice Chair of the Annapolis Environmental Commission. I have just a few updates to share with you all today, but also a couple of reactions from some of the agenda items you all have already discussed. At our January meeting, we did review and approve and submit our annual report for your review. So hopefully you all will have a chance to take a look at that and review some of the accomplishments that we've collectively made over the past year. We did submit late last year a memo to the council with some recommendations on options for a plastic bag ban. So we just wanted to bring that up again in case you all were interested in putting forward legislation and offer that we are ready and willing to work with you all to discuss specifics on that. And just note that since we sent you all that memo, there have been plastic bag ban and fee programs passed in Baltimore County, the town of Easton, and maybe a couple other municipalities that I'm missing. So the ball really is rolling statewide in local jurisdictions on that issue. At our January meeting, we also discussed some information that was shared with us from city staff about bird-safe buildings and some interest in legislation around that. So Jeremy Hansen on the AEC is currently working on some research to provide a recommendation to you all about options for bird-safe building legislation. There are a couple of different standards from different organizations, American Bird Conservancy, Audubon, that lead certifications that have to do with bird-safe buildings. And so we are trying to sort of review those and compile them and compare them with some other legislation that's going on both within Maryland at the state level and in other municipalities to give you all a concise recommendation from the AEC. So I don't have that to share at today's meeting, but hopefully that will be something that we can share very soon. And then at our next meeting, we'll also be discussing our 2023 priorities for the AEC. So I just wanted to open that up and encourage you all that I'm happy to hear some of those today. If you all have specific environmental priorities that you know that you're interested in, or just offer that any of our members are more than willing to chat with you at any time about what your priorities are. We hope to have those settled by our next meeting and present them back to council and city staff. And then lastly, I just wanted to thank you all for putting forward nominations for additional AEC members. I think I mentioned when I came last year that we were sorely down on our membership. So we did have 2 members. I'm not sure if they're confirmed yet. I think they will be by our next meeting, but we had them attend our January meeting, and I believe there's one additional person who is set to come before this committee as well to join our ranks. So hopefully you all will view that favorably and move that forward as well. But that's what I have for now, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee?
Talk about our bird-safe buildings eating over at DNR.
Yeah, so I do have we met with, and I take the blame. I did drop the ball on, I think, on inviting anybody from the Environmental Commission. I should have. But we got an invitation from the Severn River Commission. Claudia Donegan serves on that ex officio position on the commission. But anyway, she took us on a tour of the DNR headquarters to look at their technology they use on their windows. They have a lot of windows in the Talls building. And Ms. Ruth over here has been working with myself and Jackie on putting together draft legislation. And I'm happy to share that with the commission. I think it's at a good point to share. So that might be a good conversation point. And as far as plastic bag ban, I do thank you for bringing that up again. And I know that ball's also my court. I told you I'd set up a meeting on that, and then have a conversation at this body, I think, in the future, if you'd like to, so we can talk about some different options if we want to pursue plastic bag ban. Just to figure out how we might want to pursue before we get working on legislation.
May I ask,
Yes.
someone recently approved a plastic ban.
Baltimore County last week.
Baltimore County? So we can look at what they used as their justification for doing so.
Yeah, we included the parameters from a number of the different Maryland jurisdictions in our memo, but what we can do is we can also take a look at the ones who have approved bans or fees or combinations thereof since we sent you all that memo and update that. So Baltimore County would be one example that we didn't include in our original information to you all because it hadn't passed at the time.
I recall that 2 members did not support it, and I'd be interested in addressing what their concerns might be.
Yeah, absolutely. I can just quickly summarize. It wasn't necessarily that they didn't support it. There were different opinions on what the approaches would be and how it would be phased in. So there just wasn't necessarily consensus on whether it would be if there were a fee, how much the fee should be. And when it was phased in, would it be phased in over time in terms of there would be a fee first and then a ban? But all of those options have been, implemented in different ways. And so that's why we'd be willing to engage in that dialogue with you all to just sort of discuss the pros and cons, because there are so many different iterations of how you could do this. We have heard, our commission has heard from, for example, the Sierra Club that has a coalition that works on this. We know that they recommend both a fee and a ban, and a fee on the alternative bags as the most effective in terms of creating behavior change. But it was just more of the implementation of how you move forward on that we had some differences in opinion among our commission members.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Alderman Arnett?
Following up on that, this is deja vu all over again. The last time we got into the plastic bag ban, we were given a bunch of literature about how bad plastic was and we should go to paper. And then we got literature showing how bad paper production is. And so I think when we finally ran out of steam, we were thinking about a fee on both in order to encourage people to bring reusable bags. And I think Ellen Moyer actually had the city put together a whole bunch of bags that we gave out free. So it's not going to be an easy debate to re-engage in, but it's long overdue. And when you see all the plastic waste islands out in the Pacific, that it's not just bags, it's the bottles too. Somebody was drinking, oh yeah. Plastic bottle. Boom.
You don't even have to look as far afield as the plastic in the ocean. I live in Ward 7, and anywhere down, Edgewood Drive, where you see these giant, not in size, but giant store plastic bags just sort of caught in the trees and such like that. So we do think it's an important issue, but recognize that it is one that has a lot of different paths you all could go down, each with pros and cons. So.
Yeah.
And just quickly, if you wouldn't mind, if I commented on some of today's agenda items, you asked about the solar park and the pollinator garden. It's absolutely something that I think the AEC would be in support of, and to echo some of Alderman Arnett's comments, in support of as much of a natural approach to phasing that in as possible. Obviously, we don't want to create problems in a place where we're trying to fix a problem or improve something. And with the more that we learn year over year about the use of chemical pesticides and herbicides, it feels if there is an option that is feasible, that is a more natural approach, that is something that the AEC would support. I do know the Annapolis Maritime Museum Stream Restoration Project did use goats, so there is some history history of doing that, and we would be happy to work with Racine and other city staff to help identify some grant funding. I've already got a couple programs on mine that I think would be appropriate and would really fall into place for that type of project. So I think that's a place where AEC would be interested in helping move towards that more natural approach if we could help the city identify funding to do that.
Any other, Alderwoman? Tierney, did you have any?
No, I just wanted to add, I think one of the negotiating points with the Baltimore County legislation was when it was going to be implemented, and I was surprised to learn that it won't be implemented until November, right? Or something like that. So just to give people time to get their, bags, other bags, canvas bags, whatever.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your help on the and your advocacy for the plastic bag ban. I mean, personally, I have about 10 or 12 at the piece of legislation in the hopper, so it'd be helpful to have. That's why I was thinking we could maybe work on that as a committee if that's something we want to pursue with the commission. So I guess, Kaylin, if you could tentatively add that to the next agenda, is a bit more of a discussion about the plastic bag ban legislation. Maybe we could start with, if you could highlight the report you gave us and what they're doing in different jurisdictions, and maybe a summary of some of the different options we could.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Oh, sorry, Alderman Arnett.
Can I make a generic comment? This is for all the presenters, but to Kaylin also. I really do prepare ahead of time for these meetings, and I always look for the attachments, and they're never there. Like, I would like Racine to give us her materials that we can put in here. It would have been helpful to preview the Watershed Stewards Program. And we used to get a written report from the AEC, and it helps because it gets us prepped to think about questions we can ask. And as we talk to each other, I think we build a more robust kind of interaction. So I would be very appreciative if it was always very streamlined, just bullet point kind of thing, but it tells us what you were doing. And oftentimes it provokes, hey, did you know such and such kind of a thing? So I think for all of the committee meetings, we really, if we're going to have presentations and we have that little paper clip there really ought to be an attachment associated with it so we can look at it ahead of time. That would be very helpful.
Understood. We're happy to provide that.
Yeah,
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Coleman. And I'm going to use the privilege of the chairs to change the order of the agenda a bit, because I know we have, Ms. Hodo is stuck with us the whole meeting anyway. So I'd like to move to some legislation, because I know there's some folks here to talk to that. If the committee's good with that. So I would like to start with 05522 under legislation, and that is the sediment control. And just to again give you a briefer on this legislation, this came. No, I'm moving the order just for the hopefully more convenience for some of our guests, since we're already getting up there in time. So just to summarize 05522 again. This came about just reviewing the code. It started off with just creating a new fee for the program, which we're calling the milestone inspection fee, where similar to what they do with building inspections during certain major milestones in the projects, they have to get the inspector to come out there to do an inspection, and there's a fee associated with that, and they have to get the inspection before they proceed to the next phase of the construction. While we were in there, we realized we were impacting a lot of the inspection procedures, so we decided to do an overhaul of some of the inspection procedures in light of some of the issues we've had in the past with some project sites in the city. And so I did distribute, and if anybody in the audience wants these, it's a summary of what this legislation does as written, and if people just refresh your memory. And so some of the things that this legislation would do is require inspections of receiving waters, require that an inspector needs to inspect receiving waters of a project during their inspections, which means the wetlands or waters where the project drains to. It would require project plans be posted on site in a publicly accessible area. Require twice a week inspections on larger sites, and it'd still be every 2 weeks for smaller sites. Requires inspection reports to list unresolved deficiencies from previous inspections. Require that inspection reports get posted within 3 days. Require corrective action within 36 hours. Require department to keep a log of complaints. And require that inspectors must have photo evidence of site deficiencies.
Time stamped.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah, so we can work on that as an amendment. Now I think as I mentioned at the last committee meeting, I have been sitting down with the Department of Public Works to address some concerns that came up from them. And I'm about 99% done with the amendments, which I will bring to the next committee meeting. However, we are still waiting also on the actual proposed fee amount, which I am leaving up to the Department of Public Works to determine based on how much they think their inspections are going to cost them. And so once we have the fee information and updated fiscal note, we can bring that back to the committee, and I anticipate that being next month. And so I did want to, though, open this up to any kind of public comments, testimony, because I know some environmental groups had some thoughts on this. And but after that, I would be open to a motion to postpone until our next meeting as far as making a final recommendation. So with that, if there's anybody who would like to come up to the table, or actually both groups want to come up to the table, we have the Arundel Rivers Federation, Executive Director Matt Johnson, and we have Severn River Association Executive Director Mr. Iliff. Even though I just did it, please introduce yourself for the record on the mic.
Sure. Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. Matt Johnston, current Executive Director of Arundel Rivers Federation. So we represent the southern half of the peninsula, the South River, and its entire watershed. So I was very interested in that presentation as well, because that reservoir is a headwater of the South River. So we'll be interested to work with you all on that. We're very interested in this legislation, and thank you for bringing it forward. For 3 years, I served as the Environmental Policy Director for County Executive Stuart Pittman. And in the county code, we realized that we had the ability to inspect receiving waters. We had the ability to go out there and inspect the actual pollution and erosion that was occurring off of construction sites. And we turned the ball game completely around with construction inspections. Instead of just going onto a site after a rainstorm, after a complaint from one of you, from one of our organizations, or from a citizen, instead of just going onto the site and checking the box that there's grass growing on the stockpiled dirt and that there is a little bit of protection for the inlet, our inspectors at the county started going off the site and actually inspecting the pollution. Why else would we have erosion and sediment control laws unless we were going downstream to see if there was erosion or sediment control problems? So that changed the ballgame. And so I'm here for Arundel Rivers Federation in strong support of this ordinance, specifically because it requires inspections to be increased in frequency, and it requires inspections of receiving waters. That will help out tremendously. We have over 5,000 supporters in Arundel Rivers Federation, and we get a lot of complaints, but the vast majority of complaints, as I'm sure is no surprise to you, is sediment pollution from construction sites. So if I may, I just wanted to read from the county code, basically what I would offer as friendly amendments to give your inspectors and all of you even more power to stop this pollution. In the county code, it reads, quote, "It is a violation to create a source of off-site erosion or sediment deposition." And it goes on to say, if at any time during construction and before a certificate of completion is issued, any sediment deposition or channel erosion is noticed, it shall be repaired as directed by the department. What that language does is not only allows inspectors to go and actually find the problem, but it allows them to hold the polluters liable. In state code, we cannot exceed a $10,000 violation fine on a sediment and erosion control site. But this allows the county and could allow you to exceed that and require that the polluters pay for the damages. Now, I'll just make one more point from an organization that does this all the time. We restore streams. We restore them in the city of Annapolis. We restore them in the county. It costs us, on average, $1 million for every half mile of streams that we restore, oftentimes downstream of old construction sites and new developments. That's taxpayer dollars. So we are subsidizing, the taxpayers are subsidizing the eventual restoration of those streams, when we could stop it and save ourselves a lot of money by inspecting these sites and inspecting these streams immediately. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
And do we have those amendments?
They are in written testimony from Arundel Rivers Federation on January 9th, and I'm happy to provide that same written testimony for this meeting.
Yeah, please resubmit that, and
Will do.
any questions from the committee for Mr. Johnson?
Well, I'm not sure it's for Mr. Johnson. Hi, Mr. Johnson. Our description says conditions for reinspection. So I guess my question is, how thorough is the initial inspection? And is this reinspection really a new inspection further downstream, and maybe it's not the correct terminology in our description? I don't know. That's my question.
Yeah, I think it's.
I'm looking at the staff report.
Yeah, I do have an email into staff as far as redoing the staff report so we can get some more information in there, because I think you're right. The reinspection is not the correct word to use there. It's these inspections, because most of the legislation deals with overhauling our current inspection process, not reinspection necessarily, just all the inspections that happen under this program.
Okay, that was my question. Thank you. So we'll wait for the answer.
Yeah. And as far as the proposed amendment, I think I'll take a closer look at that. And I think personally, as the sponsor of this, I am planning on following up with a phase 2 of this legislation. It'd be new legislation that would be raising our standards, which I'll take a look and chat with Mr. Ruther. That might be a more appropriate place and time to include this, because we're only impacting certain sections of code with this legislation. And so we'll all look into it more, though. Alderwoman Tierney.
Yeah, I just want to ask sort of a real life question on this. And what comes to mind is like Parkside Preserve, where we obviously had some impact into quiet waters, right? Okay, so how is this delineated on the construction documents? In other words, a typical construction project has your limits of disturbance, and so is there any liability, in going over to that adjacent property? How do you address that in the documents? Like, you can go over there. How do you know? Do you know what I mean? You're expanding the responsibility of the contractor, basically.
Absolutely.
So you have to be really clear on how you delineate that. Have you had any problems with that?
That's a great question to take back to the county to see if they have over the years that they've been doing this. But in my experience, what the inspectors would do is they would request permission by the adjacent property owner. It was easy for Parkside. It was the county property. In fact, Jesse and I were out there quite a bit. But they would ask permission to enter that site and walk downstream. The other portion of county code that I did not read off is it actually describes how you monitor the downstream area. You place a monitoring device, a stake, a grade stake, in the stream, downstream of the construction site outflow. And you go back and you inspect that downstream stake over and over again after every rainfall. So it's a matter of getting permission from the adjacent property owner.
Thank you.
One other thing that I would add, and just since I know I should, my name is Jesse Iliff. I'm Executive Director of Severn River Association, is that the limits of disturbance aren't always going to be where the limits of the parcel in question are. So a lot of times what Matt is describing are points of investigation is what they're called, and they will be downstream but still on the same piece of property but outside of the limits of disturbance. So there are sometimes going to be opportunities where you to assess the offsite sediment deposition without having to go onto another owner's piece
What
of
was
property.
that acronym? That I like that. Points of what?
Points of investigation is when you're
Yeah.
looking at a blueprint
Okay.
for a development.
And that's what I was getting to, that those will be identified, you know.
They are currently, yeah, when you submit a grading plan, those are going to be on there.
Great. Thank you so much.
And Mr. Iliff, do you want to just roll into your comments and then we'll open up again for questions?
Sure. Matt covered a lot of what I would have offered in support of this. I think that the inspection of receiving waters is a key improvement in the code for the reasons that we've described. Sometimes, you know, the existing code prohibits creating a source of offsite sediment pollution, but it isn't always possible to tell whether that has happened very easily, often because the discharge points from construction sites are armored in such a way with riprap or in concrete that flow can travel over them quickly and carry sediment with it, but not leave a whole lot behind, but it will deposit in places that are less easy to recognize and sometimes offsite. And so carving out the ability for inspectors to identify places where that sediment has deposited offsite is key to, you know, making sure you have a robust enforcement paradigm. And that was the only thing I wanted to add. So,
All right. Are there any questions from the rest of the committee for either of these gentlemen?
Thanks for the comments.
And so I'll just jump in. So, and Mr. Iliff, I know, you know, one of the reasons why I wanted to, you know, I got the idea for the receiving waters inspection requirement from Mr. Johnson in the county. But I believe you had experienced this firsthand when you were with Around the Rivers Federation as far as Parks are Preserved, because you were walking through the park looking at the receiving streams and creeks in the park, correct? Or around the park, correct?
yeah, exactly. So I was South River Keeper before taking my current position, and so that drains into Harness Creek on the South River. And it became clear after a certain number of violations that had happened there that the city inspectors weren't seeing the same offsite damage that I was seeing and that others were reporting. And this can happen for a number of reasons. The concentrated flow that I mentioned earlier is one, but oftentimes also streams braid and sort of double helix with one another, and certain channels will look fine and certain channels will look very polluted. Sometimes it goes subterranean. So there are a number of reasons why, if you're walking along the limits of disturbance of a construction site, even if you're looking outside of the site, you might not see it. And many times I was sending city inspectors photos and video that I took that I would have been probably a half mile away from the construction site and still seeing evidence of sediment deposition, and there wasn't any other open site within the watershed that could have made that pollution. So connecting the dots is important. And another reason why is that if the pollution were able to travel far enough to reach what are called waters of the state, then that could trigger something beyond a grading and sediment control sediment and erosion control violation, and also trigger Clean Water Act jurisdiction for enforcement by the state. So, you know, it's another important reason why being able to go off-site and encouraging or requiring going off-site is important for good enforcement.
And you two deal with this really on the ground, but you've also dealt with, and you're dealing with it on the policy level, working with the state on improvements. So I know you're very familiar with the current standards. So I guess my question would be, do you feel that, like, kind of two parts of this, like, do you feel the state minimums, which is what the city uses for inspections, is or has been sufficient? And on the other hand, as well as the standards as far as protection. So the question about inspections and as well as the protection measures that are in place.
Which one of us says no first? No, I'll say no first. No, and that's nothing to take, that's no criticism of the city. That's a statewide problem that these regs are outdated. In fact, so I'll go 2 examples. One, they do not store enough precipitation on site. We know our precipitation is increasing. I'm sure this committee's talked about the worsening precipitation and storms that we're having, and how we need to change our post-construction stormwater requirements to build different types of bioretention and ponds. The same has to happen at the state and at the local level eventually for construction sites to store more water on site. But secondarily, you're absolutely right, Alderman. Arundel Rivers Federation is working with Senator Alfred to introduce, actually it's been introduced, a statewide bill that will put pretty much the language I just told you about you may not create an off-site source of sediment deposition or erosion, putting that in statewide law. Because inspectors don't see, whenever they look at the code or whenever they look at the guidance that they're given from the state or from localities, they don't see it in their toolbox that they can go offsite, that they can go and figure out where the pollution is coming from. That's why the county decided to give them that in their toolbox. That's why I'm recommending this is a great addition for your inspectors, and we're doing the same at the state level.
The only thing that I would add is that whatever the merits of the floor established by state law were at one time, as Matt noted, they've changed in terms of the precipitation intensity, duration, and frequency that we are experiencing. But also, they've got a broader geographic lens, and what is appropriate in the Piedmont or the Allegheny Plateau in terms of being suitably protective of the Chesapeake is not going to work in a town that's half in the critical area. And so I would absolutely encourage Annapolis and other areas like it to go above that floor, because our local resources are going to be much more deeply impacted simply because of the proximity of our construction sites to receiving waters and tidal waters.
And when was the state law originally passed?
The first state erosion sediment control law was in 1970. Maryland was actually the first state in the country to require these sorts of practices for all construction sites. But it's been, as laws are, it's been amended many times since then.
Okay. Good to know. And I think it's been a while since it's had significant overhaul, right?
As far as I know, I've only been in this business for about 7.5 years, and it hasn't happened in that time.
All right. Well, thank you. And I also wanted to ask about transparency, because some of the things this addresses is transparency of as far as inspection records. Like, do you think there's a benefit to improving transparency as far as access to inspection records, photographs, complaints, or follow-up time, anything along those lines?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the city of Annapolis's e-Track-It system, I think most people that are familiar with it would agree is kind of clunky and hard to navigate. And that's from somebody who is paid to take the time to look into that kind of thing. And for a layperson who might be interested in finding out what's been going on with the development next to their house, it could be even more difficult, not to mention people who don't have access to a computer in the first place. So making it more available, I think, would be very helpful. And it would be easier on city staff, too, because there would be less people saying, what's going on if it were easy to figure out. So.
Very good points. All right. And as far as next phase, it might be good since we've had some of the groups here together. I mentioned the second phase of this effort, which would be to raise the standards, which I think you both have kind of alluded to needing to do to match the increased rain events and change in the climate. But it might be worthwhile getting together perhaps after this session with Environmental Commission and your organizations and perhaps others to see, we like to be trendsetters in Annapolis, like we kind of were with forest conservation. And so, perhaps after the session, we can work on trying to get standards improved and passed before next year's General Assembly to do the same thing. Would be good. So I'll be in touch about that if you guys are open to that.
Absolutely.
I'd welcome it. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you for taking the time to come out. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation to come out.
And I would entertain a motion to postpone.
I'll move that we postpone.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. And the next item is, what do you do? Now? Well, we don't. Yeah. So next item on the agenda is 05222, which is turtle-friendly curbing legislation. And this one, I also would entertain a motion to postpone because I know this is going to be the 90-day. It's going to kick it to the next council agenda for the 90-day rule. However, I've received some draft maps from the GIS department that's going to help to narrow the scope, but also show visibly where this is going to impact and also the miles of road that'll be impacted. So I think it's important to wait for that so we can really give this a full evaluation. I'm in no rush.
Turtles move slowly.
The turtles are slow as well. That's right. As long as we don't kill the turtles. But all right. So if there's a motion to postpone on that,
I'll move postponement of 05222.
all right.
Postponement is our
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And I'll also have some amendments with that for the next meeting to talk about. The last item is a report from Ms. Hodo on the resilience work. Or I guess it's more just it's all the resilience work, right?
This is everything.
Okay.
Again, Racine Hodo, Environmental Programs Coordinator. I emailed this electronic document on Monday. So you should have it. I'm not going to go through everything that's listed here. It's a lot. I'm going to highlight a few items that Jackie and I have worked on, mostly Jackie. So the city has a partnership with the Chesapeake Bay Trust and Anne Arundel County, and the city annually is giving CBT $300,000 for watershed restoration projects. We're going in, we are, I think, we're either in year 2 going into 3 or in year 3. The last year, 22-23, fiscal 22-23, 5 projects were submitted. Well, more than 5 were submitted. 5 were chosen by CBT. The city of Annapolis helped with that process to pick the projects, and they are different from a stormwater retrofit to a watershed assessment. So they scan the gamut. Hawkins Cove, that project, the RFP has finally gone out. January 25th, it went out. The closing date for the RFP is February 28th. And we will take it from there in trying to find a contractor for this living shoreline project.
Good.
Brewer Hill, the erosion and stabilization work was completed last fall. The sediment and erosion controls are still up, and therefore the environmental compliance inspectors are still inspecting the site weekly or bi-weekly. I'm not sure what their schedule is. And what the contractor is waiting for is spring to come, and then they will do a permanent stabilization of the area. The city has worked with the Save Our Trees people. It's a volunteer group that Jackie worked with them mainly. I work with them now if they have any questions or need any assistance. And they also deal with Mitchell as getting the word out for when what they do is they go to different areas and they cut the ivy off of trees in order to save the trees. And there's a way to do it where from a certain height below, you cut the ivy off and then it'll die off of the tree. So the city was very instrumental in sort of helping them get themselves established. The Climate Change Consulting LLC was retained to assist the city with an EV plan, electric vehicle plan. And purchasing EVs and installation of charging infrastructure. That being said, the city is also working with BG&E looking for other location opportunities for EV charging stations. Plastic-free Annapolis. Due to COVID, things were delayed. But plans to educate and implement a plastic-free Annapolis will commence during 2023 and will include public education. So we're going to gear up an outreach and education piece for plastic-free Annapolis. Part of it, this is making sure that our city departments are, getting rid of using plastic to the most practicable that they can find to get rid of plastic. We're working on a zero waste policy for the city. This would be for city-led events where we cut down the waste stream to nothing if we can help it. Everything is either recycled or reused or washed or but we're working on that policy. We've just started it, so we'll be working on it during 2023 as well. The Resilience Authority has a director now. Came on board in January 2023. The board of directors was seated in December 2022, and the city requested $10 million for City Dock project, I should say. The CRS. Part of submitting the application is that there was a piece of our legislation that needed to be revised. It had to do with equipment, mechanicals being above the base flow elevation. We have a freeboard in the city of Annapolis of 2 feet. That means that everything that's in the special flood hazard area has to be built 2 feet above the base flood elevation that's on a FEMA firm map. Part of our code contradicted this and said that mechanicals could be 1 foot above BFE. So it was pointed out by FEMA, and it was required that is corrected, that 1 foot being built above the base flood elevation, or BFE, is changed to 2 feet, which matches our freeboard. So that is in process of making that change. Because of that, we are delayed. And because we are delayed, we won't make it for the October certification, but we should get it fixed. I mean, the legislation changed relatively soon. We will submit that change to FEMA. They go through their process, and I think they submitted in October, which means that in April of 2024 is when we will get our rating. And I've been informed by our ISO, which is Insurance Service Officer, and she has told us that we will come in at a 7. We are a 10 now, and you want to get as close to 1 as you can. So the lower you go, the better your rating. So we're at 10 now. Every time you change a rating from 10 to 9, that's 5%. 9 to 8 is 5%. 8 to 7 is 5%.
So 10's the worst?
10 is the lowest. So we're coming in, when we do in April of 2024, come into CRS, we're going to come in at a 7, which means that we will have a 15% savings for flood insurance for those who have flood insurance in the city of Annapolis.
That code change is going to be on Monday's agenda.
For the city council? Oh, wonderful. So that's on the city council's agenda, so it's moving through the process.
That's what that, yeah, I thought that was what it was, yeah.
And that's all I'm going to go over. If there's anything that you see there that you had a question about, I'll do my best to answer questions. But there's so much that Jackie's been working on. Yeah. We'd be here all night going through the whole thing.
Do you have any questions, Alderwoman?
No, I have a copy of the report, and it's pretty extensive, so thank you.
Yeah, it's Jackie, I just polished it up, so it was pretty.
Alderwoman Tierney.
Thank you. Racine, maybe after, sometime later, not now, but I'm confused on, we did pass legislation on floodplain management 051-22, and I can send you a copy of that, which basically has language addressing the mechanical, electrical, plumbing. I just wanted to know how that coordinates with what you were talking about.
When you say we, the Environmental Matters Committee?
No, the city council actually passed this floodplain management ordinance 051-22.
That's the one that's going to be on the Monday agenda.
Oh,
I think you may have had a first reader.
Oh, we didn't pass it. Okay, I'm behind. I'm looking this up.
Because I was a little confused because that is the legislation. That's
Okay.
exactly
Is that
what I was
Cynthia
talking
just
about.
said? Did you just mention that?
Second reader on Monday.
Okay, be there. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I guess my question, I'm looking to see if it's on here, is here is the resilience plan and recommendations. Because I thought what's the latest on that? It says in October, Stantec led the kickoff meeting.
Oh,
that's
you're
still
talking about the
being-
Stantec?
So Stantec was pulled in to work on that?
Right. Specific to the resilience plan, I don't know. I know that, no, that's Smith Planning that's working on the hazard mitigation plan. I was thinking about them. I am not sure about Stantec and where they stand with this report.
Okay. That's fine. If we can get an update next meeting. All right. If there's nothing else, I want to thank you for your time. Ms.
Sure.
Harlan, for joining us today.
Sure.
And anything else for good of the order?
No, Mr. Chair, I'll move that we adjourn.
I'll second that since Mr. Arnett had to leave. And all those in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.